Hello and welcome to Mecha Anime Reviews. Or I would if I was reviewing an anime. I know I promised the genesis of Okorion was next, but since Avengers Infinity War was recently released and because I felt like it, we're gonna take a look at the live-action Japanese series Toei's Spider-Man. First, some background. In the 70s, Marvel and Toei had a 3-year licensing deal where they could use each other's properties however they saw fit, of which resulted in Toei creating this show and an anime of Tomb of Dracula, which anime reviewer Bennett the Sage took a look at, while Marvel used the main robots from Vanguard Ace and Combattler V in their Shogun Warriors comic based on the toy line of the same name. Apparently, Battle Fever J was supposed to be a Captain America series before becoming its own thing as well. Stan Lee likes this show, and it seems Marvel does as well, considering this particular version of Spidey would show up again in Spider-Verse. The story is, well, fairly close to the original comics. A mysterious man hiding in the caves makes contact with a spaceship and redirects it towards the Earth, where it is discovered by Dr. Hiroshi Yamashita. Unfortunately, the spacecraft also attracts the attention of the Iron Cross Army, an evil organization led by Professor Monster, who sends his minions to kill the good doctor. Dr. Yamashito's son, Takuya Yamashito, ends up discovering the Iron Cross Army and stumbles upon the man who called the spacecraft, who calls himself Garius. He came to Earth in order to fight the Iron Cross Army after they destroyed his home world, Planet Spider. But a grave injury and 400 years of surviving forced him to transfer his powers onto Takuya. Takuya gains the abilities of a spider, a new suit, and the ability to call upon the spacecraft called Marveler, which can transform into the mighty Leopardon. Alone in his quest, Takuya fights the Iron Cross Army to avenge his father Angarius while protecting the world as the emissary of hell, Spider-Man.
Wait, hold on. That doesn't sound like Spider-Man at all.
What would you know, Dr. Sanchez? I bet you never read the comics.
The main character isn't even Peter Parker.
Look, just because he isn't in high school or taking pictures for the Bugle, doesn't mean this isn't an otherwise faithful adaptation. Alright, I won't complain too much about the special effects of the time. It is the 70s, and while it's easy to dunk on old live-action properties for outdated effects, I won't hold it against it. To be honest, most of the stunt work is competently done, and the effects aren't too shabby. I will say, however, that while the Spider-Man costume looks pretty awesome, the monster suits I don't think aged well, and the editing of the fight scenes are kinda iffy. They repeat shots, pull jump cuts, and at points characters will be standing in one place, then turn up in another that disrupts the continuity of the scenes. Though to be fair, it's only really a problem in the earlier episodes, and the rest of the series improved from this flaw. Now in this series, Spidey pilots a giant robot called Leopardon. You know, like he usually does in everything else he's in.
No, he doesn't.
Shush! Now, true story. This series has some historical significance, since while this isn't the first Toku series or even the first Super Sentai series made by Toei, it was the first time Toei included a giant robot in a Sentai-esque series, when the first two Sentai shows didn't have any. The inclusion of Leopardon is what led to future Sentai works having giant robots as a staple, so that's really cool! It's a shame then that the giant robot versus giant monster fights aren't particularly good. All of the fights are short-lived and end with Leopardon killing the monster in 2 hits. I'm more forgiving of this invincibility than I am in, say, Zellrimer, since 1, the series has enough on-the-ground Spidey action to make up for it, and 2, the Leopardon suit was either damaged or stolen in the middle of production, so they couldn't film more complex fights and had to use stock footage. It still sucks though. The acting is mostly okay, the characters are played decently by the actors. The highest I can praise is that Mitsu Ando managed to give an imposing and menacing presence to the otherwise fairly generic Professor Monster. The music was composed by Michiaki Watanabe, aka Chumei Watanabe, who's responsible for the soundtrack of many old 70s mecha anime shows, notably Mazinger Z, Kotetsu Jig, and others. His soundtrack for this show is an example of his solid work, atmospheric, action-packed, tingled with a measure of sadness. While I mentioned how the series skews fairly closely to the source material, it does contain some pretty far-out differences, like how the show has Takuya learning some responsibility from his parental figure's death, how everyone else thinks he's undependable due to his need to keep a secret identity, how friends he knows or came across end up either dead or turn into villains, how whenever he's feeling down he sometimes goes to his parental figure's grave to ask him what to do.
Wait, That's actually close.
What? Nah, those are pretty different from how Spider-Man operates. You must have gone crazy from your experiments again.
Like, whoa, are you fucking with me or something?
Hey, you watch your language. There are children present.
Fuck this.
Okay, all joking aside, in spite of the massive differences in premise and characters, I think the series does a decent job capturing Spidey's core elements. The best episodes of the series are the ones that have a tragic or bittersweet component to them, since the drama is surprisingly decently handled and felt the most Spidey-like out of the series. My favorite one being episode 13. That one had Takuya being accosted by a biker gang, only to come across Amano, the father of one of the gang members. Takuya tries to reassure Amano that his son will see his senses and come back to him, which reminds him of his own behavior towards his father when he was alive. While Takuya learned responsibility and matured, sadly the biker gang member ended up tossing his own father aside, and he ends up killing Amano when he gets turned into a monster by the Iron Cross army. It's some good stuff. Of course, outside of this, the show is pretty fun to watch. It contains some pretty cool action, downright goofy and silly moments that are still enjoyable, and some of the monsters can be memorably campy, and there are some one-off characters that are kinda interesting or memorable. The show is pretty easy to find faults though, never mind the logical problems or how goofy and stupid the show can get at times. I think the supporting characters get shortchanged in this show. Takuya has a sister, a younger brother, and a girlfriend named Hitomi who barely play any roles in the stories outside of providing some comic relief. Since Hitomi is a photographer, she sometimes gets stuff to do, but the family doesn't even get that. One-off characters get more time to develop than they do. It's kinda sad since 2 episodes are devoted to Spidey and this kid he had to do a blood transfusion with to save his life, and how they're like brothers, seemingly ignoring that Takuya has an actual little brother that he barely spends time with. What a bummer. Not even halfway through the show, they start devoting episodes to Spidey helping kids. While there are some good episodes built around the kids, the ones that actually focused on them tended to suck more than not, since they're not only far lighter than previous episodes, but the plots are even more stupid than usual, not to mention being annoyingly repetitive. There are some plot elements that were wasted, like Professor Monster's henchwoman Amazon is running the magazine Yutomi works at, called Woman's Weekly. You'd think that, since Spider-Man is an enemy of hers, she'd use the magazine to promote anti-Spider-Man propaganda in a way similar to good old J. Jonah Jameson, right? Not only does that never happen, that part is dropped quickly and is never mentioned again. I know long-term storytelling wasn't a thing at the time, but come on, more could have been done here. With that and other characters. It's really easy to pick apart, but the show is fairly enjoyable in my opinion. Good action, some decent stories, just wish it took more advantage of some possibilities, and yeah, the show is stupid a lot of the time. Spider-Man Boogie, anyone? I highly recommend it, if only because I think it's interesting to see how American concepts are interpreted by another country, and it has some historical significance given how it contributed to adding giant robots to Super Sentai. See you next time for an actual Mecha anime review.
無敵の男 Spider-Man